is President and Chief Operating Officer of Kinder Morgan, the largest midstream and third largest energy company in North America based on enterprise value. Mr. Kane is responsible for developing and executing the company vision, strategy, and allocating capital to Kinder Morgan business units in a disciplined manner. He also coordinates the company's efforts to achieve operational excellence. Mr. Kane joined Kinder Morgan in 2002 and has held numerous senior management positions within the company. He's also spent 30 years in the energy business. Very impressive. Thank you. Please welcome Mr. Kane. You can do this.
Okay, good. Well, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to talk specifically about how we came to craft what was really kind of a precursor to the SMS that will ultimately be developing after we close a few gaps. I'm going to go over briefly the Kinder Morgan assets, and really mainly for the point of showing you the diversity of our operations, which that diversity kind of fed into how we went about constructing our management system. I'll describe what that management system is, our OMS, or Operations Management System. I'll talk about our approach to constructing it, what we learned, and maybe what others who are going through this can learn from our experience, the benefits of it, which is very important, and then finally the gaps that we think we need to close versus the standard that's now out there. Okay, we have natural gas pipelines, and in this business unit we're doing a number of different things, some of which are apparent on the map and some of which are not. We're in interstate natural gas transportation, so we have long-haul pipelines. We're also in gathering and processing, so we have smaller pipelines, smaller diameter pipelines, plus we have processing facilities, many of which are PSM facilities. We have a little bit of fabrication or manufacturing going on in here, where we create gas chill units, as well as vessels for the industry. So there's a real diversity of operations in what we do in our natural gas pipeline segment. All by itself, there's a diversity in operations there. Products pipelines, Ron McLean, who you heard from earlier, is the president of this business unit. And so here what we're moving is crude, condensate, NGLs, and refined products through pipelines and into storage and terminaling facilities. Terminals, we have two groups of assets here. One is bulk terminals, where we're handling things like coal, petcoke, and steel. We're storing and loading it for our customers. And in all these businesses, there's a common theme, which is that we're getting paid for capacity in our system, and we're getting paid on a fee basis, and generally without respect to the commodity price. So we're getting paid a fee for service. It's a fee for service kind of business with all these different kinds of assets. The bulk business is one part of this. The other part of this, and actually the larger part of it, is our liquids terminal facilities. So we have 43 million barrels of storage on the Houston Ship Channel, for example. We're building to 12 million barrels in Edmonton. Crude storage there, mostly refined products in the Ship Channel. And so we have docks, we have inbound pipelines, outbound pipelines, and storage facilities. The CO2 business is a little bit different from the others. It's got a pipeline component to it. We're moving CO2 by pipeline from southwestern Colorado primarily into the Permian Basin. And so that looks like our other businesses. We're moving that commodity for our customers, but we're also moving it for ourselves. We take some of that CO2, about 40% of it goes for our account, and we put it in the ground and recover oil. So that's our enhanced oil recovery operation. So that involves drilling, that involves gathering, a whole variety of operations. So a long way of saying that we have a lot of different operations within Kinder Morgan, and the way we approached a management system designed to achieve certain safety and efficiency objectives across that diverse asset base. Obviously that diversity had to influence how we approached it. Kinder Morgan Canada is our fifth business segment, and this is a crude oil pipeline that we are in the process of expanding in Canada, moving oil sands crude from Alberta over to the coast. Okay, so now for a description of what we ended up with in our operations management system. We put this in place back in about 2007. I'll actually say I wrote the first draft of it. I'll take credit for that, but a lot more credit goes to all of our operations VPs and the heads of EHS and others in the organization who made the final draft really much better, and of course made it get implemented and made it successful. It's a comprehensive system, so you have to think about the culture of your organization. For our organization, if what we tried to do only spoke to safety, then people would compartmentalize it, I think. And I think this is true of a lot of organizations. We needed it to be not just about how you do your work safely, but how you do your work, how you do everything with quality. So that means safety, efficiency, how we develop projects and execute on projects, how we do project management, in other words. All those things folded together. That made it very important to people. It made it very relevant to every person, not just, oh, the EHS department really needs to be focused on this. We needed it to be part of everybody's job every day, and so that's why we took a comprehensive approach. We laid out objectives, so we have a section that's about our objectives, a section about our policies, and then this is very important, assigning roles and responsibilities to every employee, all the way up to our office of the chairman, okay? So I have responsibilities under this document when it comes to the budgeting process, when it comes to periodic reviews that we do in our quarterly business reviews. I have obligations, our business unit heads have obligations, our operations heads have obligations, our EHS group has obligations, and the legal department has obligations, and every employee has obligations, and they're defined in this document. The processes, we lay out things that we do, and I'll show you how we piggybacked on what we already do here. Annual, quarterly, monthly, weekly, and event-driven things. This is important because I think it's a natural reaction when there's a need to address an issue like improved safety, for example, to say, well, I'm going to set up a task force, and we're going to go out and run, we're going to get all the best people, and we're going to put them on it, and they're going to focus on it, and we're going to expect a deliverable back in a few months or a few weeks or whatever it is. You go through that process for a while, and it will naturally fade. It will naturally drift off. You might get something done with that. You might accomplish great things with that. I'm not disrespecting that. But I think if you really want to have continuous improvement, you need to make it part of something that you're doing all the time. And, you know, we do this like clockwork. You know, every month we do this. Every quarter we do this. We have the conversations that we need to have around all topics that are important to us, whether they're financial or commercial or operational. Audit and assessment. You know, you like to set it and forget it, right? But unless you go back and check, you don't know if there are exceptions, if everything is being followed through on. And so then we identify those exceptions in an audit, and then we close those exceptions, right? And we track those exceptions to closure. And so we make as much as we can. There's no system designed by any human being that's perfect or flawless, but we, as much as possible, make it a closed loop. And then finally, review and amend the OMS at least annually. And so I think we're a little bit ahead of the game here when we talk about it as a maturity model. You know, how do you make sure that your system continues to evolve and get better? The way we did it initially, and then we'll make some improvements to this, but we made sure that every year in one of our quarterly operations meetings, we sat down, actually we distributed it all in advance and identified things that we ought to change or update or revise to make it more effective. The benefits. There are huge benefits from doing it this way, we found, because of the management attention that gets brought to bear. That helps in resource allocation. If management is keenly aware of something that needs to be addressed or an issue or problem, then the resource allocation discussion gets better, I think, in service of the objectives of safety and good operations generally. It also, I mean, it just helps for, you know, Rich Kinder, our CEO, can tell you how we do damage prevention, for example. And our board of directors could probably tell you how we do it too. And it's important that when you start sharing that information in the company, they start thinking things through. And look, not everybody's going to be an expert in integrity management. I'm always impressed by the people who know that at such a fine level of depth. But if you're talking about it, you can get schooled on it, and your good managers are going to ask good questions, and they're going to get a sense for what the risks are and aren't and how you go about addressing them. Making safe, compliant operations routine, part of this is what I talked about before. It's incorporated in what we do every day, and so it's built into our O&M, it's built into the process we follow. trying to institutionalize continuous improvement, making it part of what we're doing every quarter when our VPs get together to talk about this. And I think it's improved our safety and our compliance performance overall. Nobody's perfect, but anyway, I think it's improved it. Now I'm going to show you something. I'll try to make the link here. Okay, we try to be a very good, cost-effective company. And so part of what our OMS speaks to is being an efficient, cost-effective operator, right? And so that's what our shareholders need. That's what they expect of us. And we get into the details on efficiency as well, very deep. And we go into a budget review. Our operations people can identify for me every truck that we're buying and what's on that truck and what model it's going to be and how many miles are on the truck it's replacing. And so having a good operations management system can be good for your investors too. You're focusing on all the things that matter to you from an operations standpoint. Costs, safety, efficiency, productivity, quality execution on projects. All right, so here's my contrast picture. We buy trucks that have hand cranks, okay? Hand cranks are cheaper than electric windows. Even my cheap brother has electric windows, okay? We have hand cranks, and we will continue to have hand cranks in our new trucks so long as they are still made and they're cheaper than electric windows, okay? And so that's how we serve our shareholders, right? We're cheap where we can be cheap. On the other hand, we're not a technology company, but we actually, and this is in Ron McLean's group, we're working on some other technologies in our gas group. We are not a technology company, but we were unsatisfied with what was available to us in terms of flaw detection. And so what we're looking at here on the left-hand side is brand X, you know, what's available out in the market for flaw detection. And this is looking at a seam weld defect versus our KMAP process on the right. And so we are finding previously undetectable flaws. So serving your shareholders by not spending money where you don't have to spend money, but also pushing above and beyond in the places where it's important to you for another objective for the company. I wish all flaws were this visible, but we continue to work, as the rest of the industry does, on making more of them visible. All right, the next steps for us are we've got to close some gaps. So when I say gaps, what I mean is if you look at our OMS as it stands today, and if you look at the standard now for SMS, there are some things that are more detailed, certainly, in the SMS, and here are those. Management of change is more, there's more detail. There's more language, more explicit statement of things. QA/QC, incident investigations and how they're covered. We have an incident investigation provision in our OMS. It's just not as detailed as what's in the SMS draft out there. Review of others' incidents. We do this today, but we do it, it's more ad hoc. You know, it's more about something is significant and, you know, something happens, whatever it was, U.S. Industries or Freedom Industries, they had that terrible leak that contaminated the water supplies in West Virginia, I believe. So we went around and surveyed at our terminals assets. Okay, you know, is there any lesson from this? The same thing with the West Texas fertilizer explosion. Okay, anything that we can learn from this? But it was more ad hoc like that, as opposed to, I think, a more disciplined process that's envisioned there. So more detail on those things. There are additional documentation requirements in the SMS that we need to turn our attention to. There are additional communication requirements. We have a lot of those in our OMS today, but there's more on external stakeholders and employee surveys. We do employee surveys, but again, it's more ad hoc. It's more business unit initiative in response to something that they're wondering about or maybe seeing. And it's a little more formalized in the current SMS. So we've got a team of people who have put together a revised draft of our OMS. We're going to be looking at that next week and talking about what the next steps are. And then I think very helpful what we've done is we then, each business unit will make their roadmap, you know, what specifically they're going to do to implement these provisions. Let's see, I guess, did I skip around here? I guess maybe I did. Okay, so a little bit about how we approached it specifically. we added operations reporting and review of operations issues and objectives to the most important processes that we have. And that's what you need to ask yourself. You know, if you try to create a whole new structure, a whole new regime, it is possible to do that, right? And with enough commitment, enough grinding, you can push it through and make it happen. But it becomes something wholly new and something additional on top of what people are doing every day. And so it's difficult. It's hard to do, and it's hard to make it stick. It's hard to keep people involved in it because they start sending their delegates instead of showing up themselves. So what we did is we took the things that we already do for the other objectives we're trying to achieve, financial and commercial objectives, and we put the operations stuff in there. So it was part of what we were dealing with and addressing every day. So what you need to ask yourself is, what are those things that are really important, those processes, the meetings that you have or whatever, and you can tell by who shows up to them, right, and how consistently they show up. If there's a quarterly process you go through that all of your senior executives go to, start there. You start there and you add this to the agenda. And when you do that, you get people's attention, you keep it, and you make sure that you're disseminating it. We aligned OMS responsibilities with the organization. As I said, we've got diverse operations, so what that means is that we have different business units. They're doing different things. Operations are different in each of those business units, so we wanted to make sure that we didn't try to impose a one-size-fits-all. We went with the flow on our culture. And that, again, you can buck the culture, and part of this is about culture change, right? But you want to buck the culture as little as possible. If you go with the flow, go with the cultural flow of the company, then you're more likely to be successful. So again, I'd ask yourself the question, you know, where in your organization are the resources, the authority, and the accountability? Kind of go with that as you put your SMS together. We put the OMS action items, so we have these things we do quarterly, annually, monthly, weekly, et cetera. We put those things into our compliance system. Most companies, certainly all large companies, have those. You know, that's something where the compliance requirement is identified, it's articulated, hopefully in plain English. Somebody's name is put next to it, right? A date for completion is there. Exceptions are reported if it's not done. The manager is notified if the deadline is approaching and it's not done. When the exceptions are reported, you run those down and close them out, et cetera. Take that system and put your OMS requirements into it. So I have my OMS requirements show up in our system called OpsInfo, and I'm tagged with certain of the things that need to be done and when I have to have them done. And so you need to get it into the system that forces closure and completion. This is ours, okay? We do certain things as a company annually, quarterly, monthly, and weekly. When we're handling things like what is our strategy, what are our commercial and financial objectives, a lot of that is manifesting itself. The discussions are happening in our budget process, they're happening in our quarterly business reviews, and they're happening in our weekly asset meetings. Okay, so we incorporated our operations discussion into those three things that I just mentioned. So we put them into where the important discussions were taking place. Now we did add some things, okay, and you see some of those in red. So we have a quarterly operations meeting. Am I out of time?
Green, no.
Okay.
Green.
Okay.
They're green.
Green. Red on mine, green on yours. Okay. Anyway, the green ones. And so a quarterly operations meeting which pulled, so this goes back to the organization again. The risk in a decentralized organization is that you don't learn across that organization, okay? Because everybody is accountable and responsible and has the resources they need in their organization, but you don't necessarily learn. Something happens in products pipelines, we want gas to learn from it. So we did two things. One is we brought all the heads of operations together every quarter with an agenda, and then we have the follow-ups from that. And that group has certain responsibilities too in the OMS, certain things they have to do, that they have to review and go through. The other thing is we set up working groups to cross the lines in important areas like integrity management, control room management, incident review and reporting, disaster preparation and response, and I can't read them with my farsightedness here, missing one. Regulatory. I can't read them if they're in red or green. Regulatory, so that's another instance where we've got a number of requirements we want to make sure that we consistently understand them across the organization and that we implement them. So this is the system we use to manage everything. And so for operations, we layered it into the important processes we already have, and then we added a couple of more to overcome what might have otherwise been a shortcoming of a decentralized organization. All right, so conclusions, harness the power of your best current processes, align the roles and responsibilities, try to go with your organization and with your culture, and then use your existing compliance systems to make sure that you close the stuff out. So that's how we did it. It's not necessarily going to be the same for everybody, but I think if you follow these principles, you can make it work in just about any organization. All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Really good information. I have a few questions, but I also am taking notes as well. So thank you very much. Our next speaker will be Mr. McGonigal, I believe. Yeah, Mike McGonigal. He is the President and CEO of Strategic Convictions, but he serves as the Senior Executive Advisor to Alliance Pipeline. He joined Alliance Pipeline in January 1999 after more than 24 years of experience in the oil and gas industry. He held the role of Alliance Pipeline Senior Vice President and COO from 2011 until January 2015. He also he has 40 years of energy experience, goodness, and he also held the role of Vice President, U.S. Operations at Alliance's USA Managing General Partner. So please welcome Mr. McGonigal. Do you want this one or do you want this?
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Linda. I had to laugh listening to Steve. Everything Steve said, I agree with. That's what we do. So I can sit down because really it's very, very similar when you get into this. I also had to laugh about his, kind of a little humorous about his deal about cheap. My personal email address is iamcheap@me.com. So I get it. I'm with it. Same philosophy that's there. So it really is true. I'm excited about being here today and to talk to y'all. I mean, I'm at the end of my career in many ways as I retire from Alliance and go on to do other things in the consulting business. But I truly believe what's coming out of this recommended practice is a threshold of one of the biggest changes in the industry I've seen in the 40 years I've been involved with it. And why is it? Because it promotes the right thing of zero incidents. When I started in the business back, and I'm a third generation pipeliner, okay? And my son is a fourth generation. And when my grandfather started, ruptures were to be expected. My dad dealt with them. But in our society today, zero incidents is what we shoot for. And it is what is our goal. And it's what is expected by the public, from which we have a license to operate. And it is that license that I totally believe in. So as I talk to you today, I'm going to talk to you from two concepts. One is, as John Stoddy talked about, is why should we do this? Why should we as an industry do this? And secondly, why should you as leaders in the industry do this? Why do you want to do this? And I'm going to try to give you a little anecdotal evidence of both. Let me first talk about why we should do this. I'm on the INGA board. I'm one of the trade associations that's represented here today. And for a couple of years, I've actually been the board representative to the Pipeline Safety Committee of the INGA board. And I was very active involved with it post-San Bruno when INGA started putting together the effort, what they called IMCI, or Integrity Management Continuous Improvement. How do we continuously improve our track record to go toward the goal of zero incidents? We will go towards zero. How do you do that with a goal of zero incidents? And this is a summary document that you can find on the INGA website that talks through what it was. But some things I want to point out to is that you have to work every day towards that. It is an aspect of safety culture that we've talked about a lot about here, and I think Nick's going to talk some more about. It is a dimension of how you improve your performance. You have to be relentless in doing that. So how do you do that? You have to have a system. A pipeline safety management system, I believe, in order to be relentless in that pursuit. And you have to further go on as it talks about not just integrity management principles, but applying them across your system in all aspects of what you do, like Steve talked about, and then similarly engaging your stakeholders. That circle is how you've got to really put it together to get to the aspect of the continuous improvement to get to what's zero incidents. So one of the INGA commitments of what we as an industry are committed to do is the aspect of continuous improvement. We as members within INGA, we are committed to continue to raise the standard of performance, and we believe management systems is the way to do that. And that's why we have been, if you looked at the list that was put up earlier this morning about the number of people from the industry committed to it, it was across the board. People like Brianne, the individual works for me, Tracy Scott, we're all sitting at the table trying to set and put together this standard to raise the bar, raise all ships, so to speak, in the industry for the goal of zero incidents. Why is management systems, why are they so important? Well, improving safety, we've heard of that a lot as a journey, not a project. Now, let's talk about that. Really, a journey, should it not be enjoyed when you go on vacation?
Definitely.
It should be enjoyed. Now, why do I say that? Because frankly, if you're improving safety as a leader, as a chief operating officer, which I was for 7 years, if I'm improving safety along my tenure, is that not what I'm here to do? And does that not carry a lot of gratification with it? It does, doesn't it, guys? Steve, the rest of them, whenever you can see that level improving, and you can see it across your organization, that is where you go away, that it is a journey that you want to be on. And you never want the journey to stop, frankly. And so that is why that thing is so important. We've seen the other aspects of other businesses that are doing it, but the bottom line, it is a framework, as Steve talked through his presentation. It's a framework of process and procedures that you can ensure the organization is doing what it needs to do to achieve its objectives, whether it's their financial or operational or safety or pipeline safety, whatever you want to put them to. But it is that framework under which you work, and it is so powerful for that. So that is why the focus is there. INGA has been supporting this for quite some time, starting back in 2011, moving forward. Even this summer, we'll have a workshop on this recommended practice once it comes out. And then we have already done a baseline assessment of the safety culture within our organizations, both as individual companies and as an organization in total, and we've shared that information. We will continue to update that, continue to look at that. And then additionally, we're starting to really dive deeper and deeper into the role of the executive, people like myself and others, their role in establishing a company safety culture. Just 2 weeks ago, we had an excellent presentation on that in San Antonio at the foundation meeting. We'll have another one here in Houston later this summer. So continuing to drive this down is so important. So when you do that as a leader, and I'm going to start switching here a little bit from where INGA is into my own personal experience, one thing about pipeline safety management systems and safety culture is it does have to involve all layers of leaders, top leadership and management. And in the presentation we just had, you saw that of how they've had the structure of annually, quarterly, monthly, weekly, management, all have been involved, scheduling actions, driving it through that discipline review of where you are, however you want to structure it. It doesn't have to be in the structure that Steve talked about. Mine is different that I used, but it's still a structure, and it's still regular, and it's still being driven, because that becomes the core value of what you're doing. The execution of those elements of a pipeline safety system and how that's going through and it supports each other across the organization is what really leads you to a mature system. Let's talk a little bit about the role of the leader, though. It's interesting what Steve said about, and I laughed because we are similar in many ways, even though we've never met. He wrote the first draft of his operational excellence management system. So did I. We sat down as chief operating officers and we wrote out what it was we wanted to see. And we started writing out what we were going to do differently, right? How we were going to run the organization differently so that we could change the climate. Because as you change the climate, ultimately others changes follow. Followers become believers. And after that, then the beliefs are affected and then your culture's changed. One of the facts I learned last week, or a couple of weeks ago, that really in the culture survey of the review we had at the INGA Foundation on safety, was about that the strongest defense against change is your culture. And I found that rather fascinating. Whether it's a good culture or a bad culture, it is what keeps change from happening. So you really got to get at that. If you want to change your culture, you've got to change the climate first. You can do that in the course of a couple of months, but it may take you 12 to 18 months to change your culture. But it's consistent execution through something like a pipeline safety management system that will make that happen. So what are you trying to get to as leadership? Well, yes, you are trying to change the climate. Yes, you're trying to go in and change the culture. And then ultimately, once it works for that, you're getting to exposure. What you want to really do is have an organization. We talked about assessments this morning in one of the aspects of the recommended practice. Assessments or exposure to me are the same thing. You want to be able to not only recognize exposures that are in the business, but you want to reduce them. The recognition and reducing them is what your job is about, and that's what a pipeline safety management system allows you to do around it with your worker and your processes and your equipment as you go forward on an ongoing basis. That is the journey you're on to do. So our commitment to Inga, and this is from our board, that actually is we believe within Inga that the widespread use of the management systems are essential element of our IMCI effort. As a recommended practice comes out, we will continue to promote it, we'll continue to adopt it, continue to push it forward to our members to be used. I want to turn the discussion, the remaining time I have, though, and talk a little bit about my personal experience. I tried to answer the question why we should do it. Let me turn and talk a little bit about why you should do it and why Steve and I did it. When I became Chief Operating Officer 7 years ago, I was the first one in the company. I was a COO. There was not a handbook. There wasn't a job description. I'd never done this before. And so how do you do that? And in the pipeline business particularly, it's very difficult because it's a geographically challenged asset. Our asset was in 2 different countries. I was in 4 different operating provinces, 4 different states, jurisdictions. Like, my gosh, you know, how do you get your handle around that? And we're a relatively small company, less than 400 people. So how do you do that in such a way that ensure that safety was #1 all the time? What we did, we put in place a pipeline safety management system that we called OHM. It's very similar again, Operational Excellence Management System. Created it ourselves. Tracy Scott was the one that created it. We had a dedicated resource, as you heard this morning. You've got to pick somebody, dedicate them to help create it, and she did and started putting it together. What that allowed us to do, what allowed me to do as Chief Operating Officer, was do the 2 things that both Nick and Ron said this morning. It allowed me to be an active leader acting with intentionality. I had a platform as I came in to set down and start directing the organization. And it's very difficult in many ways because I have to understand, most of the people that work for me were in Calgary, Canada, and I'm based in Minneapolis. How do you do that? You do it through a pipeline safety management system. And you would profess to that, whether it's in Philadelphia or here. You can do this if you have a structure to put around it. So let me give you a little bit of a view, and I'll try to be quick with this, of what OHMs looked like and what we put together within our system. It's really comprised of 2 things. First, a set of structured key performance indicators. We all have them, whether it's in right-of-way, how many encroachments you've had, or how many one-calls you've had. All this, whether it can be right-of-way, safety, environmental, IS, because I had a responsibility for IS. Same thing with operations, call-outs, overtime, all that stuff. I had hundreds of key performance indicators, one data set. But I also went to those same managers when they created that data set and said, give me an idea of your risk. I want to have a risk registry of the risks that you see from high to low. And we prioritized them. And so the process would be this. Before every board meeting, which we have 4 to 5 times a year, again, scheduled intentionality, before every board meeting, the week before the board meeting, I would receive a big thick binder from Tracy. And it would have all the key performance indicators, all the data that came up from the managers. They would have a listing, and they said, this is where we're standing. They have targets. This is how many ILI runs we wanted to have. This is how many repairs we wanted to have. And they'd have those targets. They'd report against those targets. So it was a performance measuring, key performance indicators that were in their performance agreements, but as well as within our own system. So we would measure this, and we would see all that data. Similarly, I would have a set of a risk registry from them where they would solve the risk. For example, let's say a guy in operations, we try to control overtime. His overtime in a certain area is getting way out of sight. Maybe it's 15, 20%, getting too high. Well, that's a high risk. Kind of what are you doing about it? So we would kind of have that put together for us to see. Then the week before the board meeting, I would get in the room with my direct reports and all their direct reports. It could be as many as 30 people in the room. And we would spend 4 hours going over the data I'd go through area by area, right of way, then I would go to operations, then I'd go to pipeline integrity, and we'd talk about where the status of everything was, and I'd get an idea from them where their risks were. We'd go around the table and do that. After that was done then, though, as a group, I asked them to put together from high to low what they believed for that quarter to be the highest risk of the organization to lowest, given the data we had. And we compiled it. Red, yellow, greens. This is where you are. This is what we need to do about it. And that was very important because we had action items on the high risk of what we were going to do about it in the coming weeks. So when I walked out of that room, I had an idea of not only key KPIs, key performance indicators, I also had an idea of the key risk in the organization. I also had an idea of what we were going to do about it and our commitments from the people. So when I walked into the board meeting the next week, I knew. I knew the status of the organization. I knew what we were going to do about it. I knew where our commitments were. But more importantly, the team that worked for me knew that I knew, and they knew that I was supporting their efforts to execute. And we would continue on. So that's the way it would work. Very simple. Not very complex. It's just the process. Then when we would come back to the next meeting, the next quarter or before the next board meeting, the first agenda item was to go back to the last review and said, did you do what you said on those action items? What's the status? And we would review that, and then we would start again with the KPIs and the risk registry. There's a variety of ways to do it. And this is just one view. But I hope it gives you a little bit of an idea and a flavor of what a pipeline safety management system can do for you. That's why you want to do it. Because you can sit down and within a short period of time, and really not a huge amount of effort, as a leader, you can act intentionally and get a really good idea of where your organization is and where it's going and where you need to tweak it. But really also what it gives you is kind of like also talked about this morning. You will find out real fast who's on your team and who's not, and maybe there are some folks that need to find a different job. Because you expect that execution, you expect that commitment to safety, you expect where you need to go. And that really does come out very, very powerfully. So I applaud the committee for what they're doing. I'm very thankful for what they've done. Because as I said, I think we're on the threshold of great change in the business and one that's needed. So I want to thank them very much for all that. Thank you, Linda.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mike. You know, I think we're getting a lot of very good information and insight on how maybe we should think about moving forward. I know a lot of companies are at different places, and everybody's had different experiences. But I'm seeing a theme emerge, and I'm interested to hear what Mr. Steve Worry has to tell us. Mr. Worry is a strategic advisor in the office of the President and CEO with Enbridge. He's been there in that particular position since last March, a year ago March. Steve previously served as president of the liquids pipelines and major projects, leading Enbridge's North America-wide crude oil and liquids pipeline businesses throughout an unprecedented period of growth, while also maintaining an equal focus on operations at the helm of Enbridge's major projects unit, which manages engineering, procurement, construction of growth pipelines across the company. Steve has over 34 years of experience with Enbridge, including more than 2 decades in the liquids pipeline business. And I'm just thinking, I welcome Steve, please come up, and just thinking about the accumulated years of experience, that's where are we at now? You know, we've got 30, over 100 years of experience. And if y'all don't ask questions, shame on you all.
Thanks very much, Linda, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm not sure how complimentary that really is now that I think about it. But after a day like this, the one thing I think we can all take home, and this one will stick with me and tell our families, is that RP 1173 is as fun as going on vacation. Go home, pull the earbuds out of your kids' ears and say, do you get it? 1173. Yeah, that's the way to go. Exactly. Yeah. Why spend time on an iPod when you can do this? Anytime you see someone with a title of strategic advisor, you can pretty well know that they're on the back nine. And so that's true. And in fact, much like Peter Lydiak, I'm actually walking up to the 18th green in my case, and so after a lot of high scores behind, I'm at last coming to the end of my formal career. At least we'll see what happens, but I will be retiring from Enbridge effective April the 30th. Although, like a bad smell in the air, I'm not completely going away. I'm going to keep providing some strategic advice, but I'm very much honored, especially in this role, to be able to lend my voice and that of Enbridge in support of RP 1173. I think that it is a tremendous thing to see our industry come together and recognize that powerful comment that was made earlier in the day, and that is that we are not competitors when it comes to safety. And to be able to say we can come together, put the best minds in and around the industry together, and come up with something that is extremely meaningful for our industry, but also for the public. I think if Jeff, if he were here, one of his sayings that he may have treated us to is that you, the committee, have been doing the Lord's work. And I know it's extremely important work. And frankly, I think, Ron, knowing your position and knowing the time demands that you have, I really want to applaud you for being the leader of this initiative and sticking with it, and for 2 years pushing this through to the product that we see today. I think that's a real testimony. But I think we're here because we all have an interest in the safety of pipelines. As operators, we move hazardous liquids over long distances to vital destinations. I think as regulators, there's a need for expert oversight and assurance on behalf of the public, and I feel very strongly about that the regulators are strong, need to be strong, and seen to be strong, so that the public does not feel that they need to replace the regulator themselves. So the regulator is a proxy for the people. The people should not be the proxy for the regulator, and so there's an interest in pipeline safety there. And then you have the public themselves, who are skeptical about pipelines in some ways. I think the way I look at in a saying, the industry, is that some find pipelines to be annoying and hazardous. Some find pipelines to be good neighbors. Society finds them necessary. And so here we sit together as stewards of that necessity, looking at the things that we have to do. And I think Robin's presentation earlier really showed us how vitally needed pipelines are going to be going forward. And so we have a public who I have spent 35 years nearly trying to hope that the public will one day, when they're pumping gas or turning up the thermostat, will thank their pipeline company very sincerely. And I want to see people at gas stations just saying, you know, putting stickies, "Thank you, pipeline company." And it's not going to happen. It hasn't happened yet. And I'm not very optimistic that it's going to, but I've had to go through my own journey in these 35 years, going from an industry that was out of sight and out of mind. Remember that years ago API came out with a video called Quiet Steel or Silent Steel, Quiet Steel. That's what we were. We were under the radar. We did our thing, and yet the vitality of the industry was, and the neededness of the industry was there. And so I think that we've always been needed. Society has never fully appreciated that, and I have had to come to the conclusion that the new world that we are in, we could either resent, and I did for a time, for a while when I was brooding about this new environment where we're in, where it seems like no one has a kind word to say about those that provide their energy. I was brooding one night and I said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to hire a long-haired guy with a guitar, and I'm going to ask him to sing a song I wrote, and it's a remake of John Lennon's Imagine, except it was Imagine There's No Pipelines. And I proposed that a little bit, and I quickly got shot down by people who said, you're going to offend all the long-haired guys everywhere, so you better not pursue that. But it was a heartfelt cry to get people to understand what the industry does for them. But let's accept that that's not an easy thing to do, and let's accept that there are people who very rightly demand zero incident performance from us in our industry. And I think that you've heard it several times today, zero incidents is the goal, it is the target, not an acceptability of 1 or 2, but zero has to be. I was thinking of our Chicago region manager in the mid-2000s. He was actually ahead of his time. He came up for his region. It was right when Coke Zero came out, and he came out with a slogan for the Chicago region called Zero Motivation. And he handed out cans of Coke Zero to everybody in the whole region, and they had pictures taken holding their Coke Zero and proclaiming loudly, "We have zero motivation." Now, you can walk through the mental exercise of what it's like to have a work group, an entire region, proclaiming that. But the point was, the focus had to be zero medical aids, zero lost time injuries, and zero preventable motor vehicle accidents. That was the point of zero motivation. It drifted away after a while. We just didn't like the ring of it, frankly, and we were worried about where it could go. And so we just kind of let that drift away, and Coke Zero, I don't even know if it's in the fridges anywhere, but it was at one time. But basically, I think that has to be our goal. That has to be our target. But I'll also say that we've heard a lot about safety culture, and my experience is that it's in the eye of the beholder. And I go back to around 1982. I was a young engineer, sent to Corpus actually to a fab shop where we were getting some work done. And we had quite a bit of training in safety at the time and the like, but it wasn't the focus that it is today. But I walked into that fab shop, and the first thing I saw was a great big sign that said, "If safety isn't your first priority, don't even think about working here." And I thought, man, that'll get you. And then I turned and looked into the shop where there wasn't one hard hat, fab shop, overhead cranes, metal pieces hanging off of jibs and everything else. There wasn't one hard hat, and I'd say half the guys were in tennis shoes. And so, but if I would have asked the owner of that fab shop, "Is safety important?" He said, "Didn't you see that sign?" Of course it's important. Don't even think about working here. And so what that taught me early on is it is in the eye of the beholder. Not a company will say, "No, safety is probably 5th or 6th on our priority list. Safety is not that important to us." Everybody says safety is our top priority, and the owner of that fab shop thought that too back then. And yet his perception was not reality. And I think what 1173 helps to do is take the subjective and make it a little bit more objective so that people can understand it isn't just how the boss feels about things or how he or she exemplifies those things, but it really is about coming to some common standards and some common practices, some common language even around this whole thing. And we've also heard a lot about safety culture, and I think the thing that Mike said that I like is you will have a safety culture. Everybody will have a safety culture. You just have to choose whether you guide it through good processes and systems or whether you just let it happen. And the other thing is that culture is not something you look at your watch for. Culture change doesn't happen on a watch. It does happen on a calendar. And Mike mentioned 12 to 18 months. I believe that. And it takes a relentless consistency and intentionality and focus to achieve that. So I think that 1173 helps to manage complex systems, and that's where the business case comes in. And also it helps to make it real. Because when you say safety management or risk management, that's very abstract. But 1173 really helps to make the whole thing more real. So what I'd like to do in the closing time that I have is just talk to you a little bit about the experience at Enbridge. And what I hope to do is to flip on some switches in your minds that hopefully will resonate in your organizations. Just very quickly, Enbridge has the largest and most complex liquids pipelines, crude oil pipeline system in the world. That's a 65-year-old system in its derivation from the start. Our gas distribution business is 165 years old, and we have green energy and other parts of the business. And we considered ourselves to be leaders in pipeline integrity and pipeline inspection technology, using and investing in the latest in inline inspection all the way from the early 1980s when all we could find was dents up until the corrosion tools and crack tools and so on. And so we felt that we were leaders in all of those things. And 5 years ago, we had the incident at Marshall that's been referenced today and that spawned the NTSB recommendation that's resulted in this RP. And it shook us very deeply. and we have responded. We've responded with integrity management. We've spent between $4 and $5 billion with a B since then on blitzing the system, every line in the system with every technology that will fit in that line: crack, corrosion, ultrasonic, MRI, and other things. And that a lot of that money has not been recovered from customers because we do not have a mechanism to pass that through in our tolls. And so, yes, we have done all of that, but I really want to talk to you about some of the things that we have focused on as a result of Marshall that became very intriguing. The first one is accountability, and that's one of the words that you've seen earlier today. We used Andrew Hopkins, who wrote the book about Deepwater Horizon called Disastrous Decisions. And we had Andrew talk to our management team, had him come and talk to our board. We soaked ourselves in the book and so on, because it wasn't just about the horizon, as you know. It was about the depth of human behavior. And one of the things that he illuminated was organizational failure, not just individual failure. And frankly, I believe that Hopkins overdid it a little bit on the organizational failure, almost leaving the impression that a worker does not have individual accountability to do their job. And you can make your own assessments of that from any work that you do with Hopkins or other risk experts. But I do think that, that he raised a very good point, and that is that the systems of the company are critically important. The safety management system and the culture of the company are critically important to enable people to do their individual jobs correctly. And I never want to let go of the individual accountability aspect of all of this. There has to be, in every one of us, the accountability for the job that we do. There were two issues really at Marshall. One was a stress corrosion cracking colony on the 34 or 30-inch pipe that we didn't find. And even though we had run crack detection tools, and it was very frustrating that the latest generation crack tool was in the line running when the rupture occurred. It was 60 miles upstream of Marshall when that happened, and that was the tool that we believe would have found the stress corrosion cracking colony. But the second issue was in the control center, and that's really what I'd like to talk to you about. Brianne earlier this morning talked to us about management of change. And after an incident in Minnesota in 1991, we had instituted in the control room an ironclad rule to be branded, if that doesn't cause an HR issue, into the skin of every employee, and that is the 10-minute rule that says that if you don't know what's happening on your pipeline that you're operating, within 10 minutes, hydraulically, within 10 minutes you must shut it down, and it cannot be restarted until Air Patrol or other regional field management has said that it should be restarted. And that I had known. I was part of instituting that rule after the incident in 1991 in Minnesota. And what I hadn't realized, what none of us had realized, is that because of a phenomenon called column separation, there were people who wanted to modify that 10-minute rule ever so slightly in the case of column separation. And so we had unauthorized drafts of the 10-minute rule revisions that had circulated and that were informally being relied on. In some cases, not in all, when it came to find out that most of the people still knew 10 minutes is 10 minutes, period, but there was just that little bit. And so as a result, the 10-minute rule was violated. And what that really showed us, and we have absolutely clamped down, and this is something that I think maybe each of you can think about, is the management of change. You have processes, you have procedures, you have standards, and we assume that everybody knows what they are and that they're doing what they're supposed to be. But are they being changed? And what's the process for approving the change? Is there a slight revision that's in draft that gets handed around and somebody thinks, well, that must be the updated version or something like that? So I really encourage you to think about that whole issue of the management of change. The third thing then is management and leadership commitment, and we've heard so much about it right from the top level. And at Enbridge, we created a safety and reliability committee of the board. It used to be embedded in the EH&S committee, the Environment Health Safety Committee. Now it's a separate committee called the Safety and Reliability Committee, and all they do is focus on the safety, that being public safety, worker safety, pipeline safety, environmental safety. That committee focuses entirely on that. Reporting to them is the OIC, and I think Paul Eberth mentioned it earlier, the Operations Integrity Committee. That meets monthly. It's chaired by our CEO, who is there in person every time. The heads of all the business units and all the SVPs from the business units are there, reviewing every incident. And I know Ron talked about Kinder Morgan and the attention that you guys pay to those incidents, near misses and other things. And I'd have to say that was new, that every single month we would sit and go through, and it takes most of a day to go through and talk about every business unit, every little thing that happened, if there's been a lost time injury, if there's been some kind of an incident in the system, that all gets done. And I have to say that has made a big difference. When the whole organization has known that if there is a vehicle accident in the middle of nowhere, the CEO will be hearing about it at that meeting. And a lot of that used to just be water under the bridge, things that happened out in a large business that we never knew about. We also created a department called Enterprise Safety and Operational Reliability, or ESOR, and that's currently headed at the SVP level, and it's headed by Rich Adams, who many of you know currently. And there are people in the room that work in that group, and that group is absolutely there to help drive business-wide performance and cultural change, not to take it away from anyone, but just to make sure that the focus on the things we've talked about is relentless. And then finally, safety culture, and there's been so many references to it today. We have a thing, and I'd like to just read it to you very quickly from our Safety Management System Framework document. I'll just read you the first paragraph. A safety management system includes the programs, processes, and accountabilities that achieve a reduction of risk to the public, the workers, the environment, and assets to a level acceptable to our organization, and I want to come back to that. While a well-documented safety management system adds value to an organization, it adds more value when it is implemented and maintained by an organization with a strong safety culture. And I'll talk more about the safety culture, but get that. To a level acceptable to our organization, you think he copped out. He copped out. He should have said to a level acceptable to the regulator, or to a level acceptable to the public or something. But this tells you, I think, what's at the heart of a lot of 1173, and that is that it is about you, and it's about your conviction, and it comes from within your company. It's the only way it's going to succeed, really. And so it says to a level acceptable to our organization, which in our organization means beyond compliance and never satisfied. Never satisfied that we've arrived. And I like that picture of the winding road that we saw earlier, because it's true that you just never completely arrive. We follow the PAIR principle, like the fruit, protection of people, the environment, assets, and reputation. We have the values of the company, which are very simple: safety, integrity, and respect. We do have life-saving rules, and at AOPL and API, we had quite a vigorous debate about this 2 or 3 years ago as to whether they were good or bad. Life-saving rules, in our case, are 6 rules that will get you fired. No question, no second chance, they will get you fired. And it really, we think, helps to put a pencil point on the importance of knowing exactly what this safety culture is and how it is possible and we hope never happens, but how it is possible to violate it. And one of the 6 is not reporting an incident, which you think, oh man, come on, you know, give me another chance at that. But that's how seriously we take it. Some feel that life-saving rules drive safety issues underground, and I respect that view. But in our case, we've had them now for several years. We've dismissed people because of them, and we do think that they are adding value in our overall safety culture. We also measure culture, as we've heard about. But a couple of the words that I think come to mind also from Hopkins are a preoccupation with failure. And that's hard. I think it was put a little bit differently earlier by Peter. But that comes hard to an optimistic person, doesn't it? And most of you are in your positions because you're not a black pessimist. If you were, everybody would have hated you so much that by now you wouldn't be here. And so you have naturally optimistic people being asked to be preoccupied with failure. And I think what that really means is that no matter how optimistic you are, you simply must say, what is going to happen? I have a system that's carrying a lot of hazardous materials around. What could happen next? Where should I look? What is the risks? What are the risk indicators telling me? And I think that that's something we've really tried to instill in our people, is a preoccupation with what could go wrong. Whether it's getting out of the truck and it's slippery, what could go wrong? Or whether it is operating the pipeline, what could go wrong? So a real preoccupation with failure. And finally, one of the things that Hopkins does encourage is become a storytelling culture. And we are trying to do that. We are trying to tell the stories of incidents that we've had in our 65-year history, or 165 in the case of the Enbridge gas distribution, although some of the folks that were around for those are hard to come by these days. But the fact is, we are trying to be a storytelling culture, telling the story of Marshall, talking about the story of Marshall or any other incident that we've had. So we're very proud to embrace and endorse 1173. I really want to thank the committee that has worked so hard to put it together. And I couldn't be more proud of being part of an industry that can come together as competitors and regulators and everyone like that and look for a common goal. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Many good points in there. Our next speaker is Nick Stavropoulos. He is the Executive Vice President, Gas Operations for Pacific Gas and Electric Company. He was brought in after the 2010 San Bruno, California pipeline rupture and explosion, with a mission to turn around the second largest natural gas operation in the country with 4.3 million customers. He is successfully leading the $2.7 billion upgrade of PG&E's gas network on a scale and pace unprecedented in the U.S. pipeline sector. Please join me in welcoming Nick.
Thank you. Thank you, Linda. Good afternoon, everybody. Let me start by thanking Ron for your leadership. And we wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for you, your leadership in bringing it together. And we owe a great deal of gratitude to you, and your legacy will live on for a long time, Ron. So thank you. Thank you. I want to thank my fellow committee members. It was inspiring being with you the last few years, and I'm going to miss you all. I hope we have a party. Hope we have a little reunion. But you know, an awful lot of hard work, yeah. And in the beginning, it wasn't clear that we were going to get to this point, but you all inspire me, and I thank you all very much. I want to thank API and the other trade associations for supporting our efforts and working together to help complete this document. I want to thank Debbie Hersman and the fellow board members at the NTSB, because they're the ones that made the recommendation that we should come together as an industry to create this SMS. She was the one, along with her fellow board members, that identified organizational failure as a key element of many incidents that were occurring in our industry, and demanded that we do something about it. And we listened. And we have to thank Jeff Weiss and Linda and PHMSA for supporting this effort and really providing the encouragement for us to be creative and to have the courage to take sort of bold steps on a number of fronts. So it was really great for me because I was so proud to be able to represent 23,000 PG&Eers on this committee to create the system, which I think is going to be a blueprint for us to continue on our journey to become a safer, less riskier industry. At PG&E, our goals really are three: safe, reliable, affordable. It's that balanced scorecard approach, Steve, that you spoke about, right? You got to do ands. If it was ors, it would be easy. Any one of those things you can do, and maybe two. The challenge comes in, how do you provide the level of safety that the public and your employees expect, to create the level of reliability that your customers expect, and to do that in a way that's affordable for them. And at the end of the day, the people that lend you money are going to get paid back, and the people that invest in your money are going to earn a return on that investment, so that we can continue to make those investments in our assets. So safe, reliable, and affordable is sort of the PG&E structure, which I'm sure many of you share those same balanced scorecard attributes. We then take that down to our various lines of businesses, because we have a nuclear operation, I think the largest electric T&D operation in the country, big power gen, hydro, solar, wind, and we have this little old gas business with about 70,000 miles of underground pipe. So when it comes down, and how that translates down to our business, is we've become very bold since San Bruno. And our objective, quite frankly, has been a mission to be the safest, most reliable gas company in the country. The safest, most reliable gas company in the country. Not the second, not the third. Now, I don't know if we'll get there, but we're going to try. And we know that's a hard mission, because most of you out there were already leading the pack and were leading the way. And when I got to PG&E, it was a very difficult time, because we were coming off this horrendous incident in San Bruno that left the company shaken, much like you spoke about in your experience at Enbridge. And it was an opportunity for us to self-reflect. We had the benefit of an NTSB report and an independent review panel report prepared by the California Public Utility Commission. And it really gave us an opportunity to rethink and remake the company. And so that's why we set that audacious goal. And in order to do that, we structured 3 pillars within our gas organization. Asset management, to be really good at asset management, to introduce process safety into our company that hadn't really had process safety principles embedded in it before, and safety culture. So the 3 triad of safety culture, asset management, and process safety. The asset management piece, we're really proud. We were able to obtain ISO 55000 certification and pass 55000 certification of our revised asset management processes. We were able to back that up with massive amounts of investment in terms of pipe replacement, piggability, pigging of pipelines, hydro testing of pipelines. We've installed 238 automated or remotely controlled valves in and around the San Francisco Peninsula, and the list goes on and on. From a process safety perspective, we have adopted process safety principles, done a gap analysis against the chemical industry process safety principles, and are trying to achieve a level of certification there as well. We also brought in last year Professors Godfrey and Harrell. Godfrey is sort of, besides Deming, he's probably the top quality assurance thought leader in the country. Professor Harrell from Union College in New York, Godfrey from University of North Carolina came out and did a thorough gap analysis and review and helped us prepare a 5-year plan as to how we were going to improve our quality assurance and quality control processes in our company. So we did a gap analysis on asset management, and we achieved certification. We've done a gap analysis around process safety, and we're driving towards excellence in that regard. Safety culture was the tricky one, right? How do you get at this safety culture? Some people say you can't measure it. And we know that they exist because we sat in committee meetings when people objected to having us put safety culture in our document and saying that it can't be measured, or if it can be measured, how are you going to do it and how are we going to agree on it? But I think most people agree there's a way to do that. So what we did is we started with a baseline assessment in 2012 to get a sense of where we were from a safety culture standpoint. And we used a survey instrument that's used by most of the large corporations in America and had a strong ability to measure how people feel about safety in the organization. And we do that survey every 2 years on a regular basis, and we utilize that as sort of a baseline. Once we got that data, we felt that we needed to have a deeper dive into just the question around safety culture. And so we've begun to use another instrument that we used last year to give us a more in-depth view into how people were feeling about the safety culture within the company. And we do something else called No Feel Do every quarter to let us know how our people, No Feel Do means how our employees, what do they know about what they need to do? How do they feel about what they need to do? And what do they do? You know, do those actions follow the sets of expectations? So we've had an opportunity to have lots of measurement tools, and they've been terrific to help us identify weak points, celebrating the gaps, the parts of the company where we didn't know that we had morale issues or not following the rule issues. And so we have an expression that Tony Early, our chairman and CEO, brought to us when he came to PG&E right about the same time I did. Tony talks about celebrating the gaps. Celebrate the gaps. Feel comfortable in being able to say something's not right. That was a huge change for PG&E. PG&E was the blame culture. When something wrong happened, you found the lowest level person in the organization, you put the blame on them, you suspended or you fired them, right? So you can imagine what that did over time. And so we had to change all that. We had to create a culture that said, you know what? We're going to have a non-punitive self-reporting system so that when something goes on, we need to know about it. Another expression we developed, we can't fix what we don't know about. I can't fix what I don't know about. Usually when I know about it, I can put it on a list, I can prioritize it, and I can get it done. We've put in place a system called CAP, a Corrective Action Program, that I stole shamelessly from our Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant. You know, and you talk about people who have a preoccupation with failure. It's nuclear power plant operators. That's all they do all day long, is think about how things are going to go bad. So I go down, visit them, and we took 23 years of experience of having a corrective action program at the plant and $75,000, and we moved that whole corrective action process and we put it into our gas operations. In addition, we created something called CAP app. And so I can go on my cell phone, and any of our employees with a smart device can hit a little thing called gas cap, and wherever they are, they can enter a corrective action that they see in the field, a safety issue, a quality issue, whatever it happens to be. They give the location, the place. It has the GPS coordinates. They can take a picture. If they have a question, they press a button on the CAP app, and they get the CAP desk.
We just gave you 4 more.
Did you? Yeah, yeah. That's on top of the 4,000 that we already have this year, literally. But it's been a fantastic tool, and I measure it from, I tell you about this during the safety culture segment, because a big part around culture is making people feel comfortable that they can report issues that they see. Enbridge has made it part of their safety principles to say, if you don't report an issue, you have very, very serious consequences, right? So you have to create a way to have people be able to report those issues. So those are some of the instruments that we use to start turning that culture around. Non-punitive self-reporting system, a corrective action program where people could report into the senior management of the organization. We have a regular monthly cadence review process where we review all those, much like the Kinder process that we use there. But also, we, as a leadership team, personally reached out to the 2 unions that represent most of the workers at the company. We've got the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers and the Engineers and Scientists of California. We've got the largest IBW local in the country. And when I came to PG&E, the second week I was there, I went to the Union Hall in Vacaville with my jeans and my work boots on and spent 4 hours with the senior leadership of the IBW and the business agent that represent the gas organization. And after a couple hours of getting my rear end kicked on all the problems that we had within the organization, we really started to have conversations about what we needed to do to fix our operations. What do we needed to do to get better? And it was wonderful because they opened up, and about every 3 or 4 months we go back. I go back with a few of my senior leaders, and we sit there and we spend 4 or 5 hours together. We break bread, we go to the Union Hall, and we ask them, what do we need to do better? Help me prioritize, help me get things done. And this has been a major revolution within the company and has really helped transform the overall culture of the operation. Plus, it's allowed us to have a view into what is really happening in the field. And we support that not just by those meetings with the leadership of the union, but our leadership team is consistently out in the field. And that's a big deal in our operation. We've got 70,000 square miles of territory, right? We're from Oregon to Los Angeles and Bakersfield and everywhere in between. So it's a lot for our leaders to get out and interact, but it's paid huge, huge, huge dividends. What I'll tell you is that words are good, but they only get you so far. That's the ante. Get you a seat at the table. Get you invited into the game. Actions are what matter. And when it comes to safety, you can put up all those posters that you want, right? You can have all the slogans that you want, and that'll work for a month. That might work for a year. But pretty soon people are going to figure out is they don't really care about safety, because if they did, they would have done X, Y, or Z. So if you were in a position of where we were like at PG&E, that's going to cost you money. You're going to have to write some checks. Now, everybody's in a different place, and I'm not suggesting that that is going to be for all of you, but it certainly was for us. For us, last 3.5 years, I've spent $4 billion of shareholder money to improve the things that we found deficient as a result of the Independent Review Panel report and the NTSB report, right? So we had to back up our words with actions. We also had to make sure, as I talked about, that we put in a no-blame culture, a culture where if something happens, it could be as a result of a miscreant worker, someone who intentionally disregards policies and procedures, someone that intentionally doesn't do as they were trained to do. But most of the time, you find out that when you peel back the onion, that maybe those policies and procedures weren't written well enough, or maybe they weren't trained properly, or maybe they didn't have the right tools and technology, or maybe they were pressured to get the job done and not follow those procedures. That's a leadership issue. That's a safety culture issue. We need to take responsibility for that. So that was an important element of change. And finally, and this is going to be a controversial one, Tony Early, our chairman, made the decision early on that money talks, and that I can tell you, when I was back east, I had the largest gas sales organization in the country. I had a sales budget of $60 million a year. And my goal was to convert as many heating oil customers over to natural gas as possible. I tried to put the oil dealers out of business. Excuse me for my liquid products colleagues here. And I had a very large, highly commissioned sales force. And what I can tell you is I could tweak that commission plan, and in about 2 days, I could see that Salesforce figure out how that meant it was going to impact their pocket, and I could see their behaviors change almost immediately. That's just human nature. In our organization, and I know not all organizations because we got some municipalities and things like that, but in most of our organizations that we're talking about, we've got incentive compensation. All of our people within PG&E have incentive compensation as part of their overall pay. Tony implemented a plan where 40% of everyone's incentive compensation has safety elements tied to it. And we have safety elements that are in our proxy. You can read about them, how we track them. In 2015, we're going to 50%. Not for everybody, but it's critically important for PG&E, the place we were in, and where we had to go. But we were able to get across this point to say, if we have a balanced scorecard, if we're saying that it's safe, reliable, and affordable, if we're saying that we want to be here to reward shareholders, if we want to be there to satisfy customers, if we want to be there to have safe service, we had to have an incentive program that represented our words, right? We're back with our actions. So those are some of the things that we've done at PG&E around safety culture. We've moved the ball an awful long way. I'm so proud of our people and how they've responded. We know that when it comes to our work, we're never done, as we talked about today. We know that every other company is getting better every day, that the bar is being raised, the new tools and technologies that are being developed that allow us to see things that we've never seen before. It's just a great time to be in our industry. I'm so proud to be at a table with these leaders here who feel so passionate about safety in their organizations. And we learned so much by sharing amongst each other. And it's just great to have the opportunity to be with all of you here today and to be on this committee. So, Linda, thank you very much.
Thank you, Nick. You know what? My head is spinning. There's been a lot of good information here, a lot of good sharing. I'm going to open it up right away for Q's and A's. Again, I have questions, but I'm hoping that we may have questions from others. I see Gary's bringing me a few. Darn, because I have to put those before my questions. And if anybody does have a question that they want to put, please come up to the mic. Okay, so I'm just going to start off here. Okay, well, these are not going to be easy questions, I could tell for the first one. Construction inspectors, particularly third-party, need to be empowered rather than blackballed and or run off when they try to do the right thing. How might this be addressed within the context of pipeline safety management systems? So we're talking about third-party contractors. Please, Nick.
So one of the elements of our safety management system is contractors, and how we treat contractors, very similar to how we treat them as an extension of the company. I think when it comes to inspectors, they're part of the overall process. I think it begins, though, with third-party contractors, is to make sure that we're getting what we paid for, that if people are going to supply inspectors to the organization, they have to be properly trained and qualified, experienced and skilled. Skilled not only technically, but also skilled in how to interact and deal with people. A lot of times you see inspectors out in the field have trouble where they may be technically correct on something, but they don't have the people skills, right? So, but those are sort of minor details, but we spoke about a little bit this morning that contractors are really sort of an extension of the company and need to be thought of as part of the big house. I think that was the analogy that we used this morning.
Okay. Any other comments?
I think one of the things that the industry has recognized this. Both the SEPA Foundation and the INGA Foundation have efforts underway to create what I'll call third-party inspector qualifications, programs for both, just like what Nick was talking about, get it what you pay for. I think it starts there, that you have an inspector who's qualified and there's a certain standard and they know what they're doing. Then in turn, it's clear how you support them in those efforts. But we definitely recognize that is an issue. But it starts with that certification, I believe. And it comes over from the aviation business, frankly. I mean, you think about inspectors that occur on aircraft. There's a lot of third-party inspectors that do that on the plane that I'll be flying later today. And there's a quality assurance there that has to be there to support those contractors, particularly those inspectors.
Maybe just add, I think the question was around inspection, third-party inspection, or was it contractors doing the work? But in any case, I think the cultural fit has become more important than ever. It used to be that in the case of a contractor, we relied on their safety program. Basically, that was if they had one and it seemed to be at least this thick, then we would rely on it, and that's all changed, at least in our company, where essentially, as Nick said, we treat them as though they were employees. They aren't employees, but we treat them that way. The other thing is with inspection agencies, which might have been a little bit of the undertone of the question, and that is the cultural fit is critically important. Because, and we've had experience with a large capital program where we've had to use third-party inspection agencies that we've never used before. And we have had indications of cultural behavior that was contrary to what we were trying to promote. And all I can tell you is usually where there's smoke, there's fire. And if you hear about some of those issues going on, check it out, because it could well be. And we discovered an inspection company that almost wholesale had the wrong culture that we had to move out.
Follow up with that. One of the things that you, let's go back to the whole concept of pipeline safety management systems. If you're really doing this correctly, within your PSMS, you will have an area of construction, you'll have an area of inspection that you'll be looking at metrics all the time. And it'll tell you, and then you will be able to look in people's eyes to see if this is going right. If there's something going off base, you'll see it, and then that's how you go and support those inspectors. I mean, you will know, but your pipeline safety management system is your window into that. You just can't depend on people to report it up to you. You've got to have an ongoing process. That's why you want to do this, and particularly for if you have a lot of activity going on. So.
I'd add one more thing too. In the CAP program that I described to you, it's also available to any contractors that we hire to do work, and so they're able to report into the CAP program. So if they did have a problem on a job where someone told them to take a hike, we would expect them to report that into the CAP system, and they could do that anonymously if they would like.
That's encouraging. You know, actually, there's another question here regarding contractors. So I'm just going to throw it in before I move to a different topic. It says, wasn't it once desirable to maintain an arm's length separation with contractors for a multitude of reasons? If that's true, what's changed? We used to keep contractors at a distance. They were contractors. Why has that changed? That's on.
It is? Okay.
Yeah.
You know, I think we're talking about different purposes here. So, I mean, I think the reason for having an arm's length relationship with contractors is to make sure that people are not getting business unfairly, or not developing a cozy relationship and getting into a no-bid relationship with someone who's a decision maker within the organization. And that still applies. And there are things that companies do to make sure that that continues to apply. You know, having a waiver of the bid policy have to come from outside the organization, things like that. So you can manage that. I think what this is talking about is needing to have them on the same page for certain other reasons, like safety and like the quality of the construction, if that's the case, or the repair or whatever it is. And so I think there are places where you have to make the distinction between the different economic interests that are involved on the one hand, and the common interest that we have on good operations and safe construction on the other.
That's a good point. So I'm going to ask you a question that actually comes off my list, but I was asked by someone else to bring it up. And they said, you know, we're going to hear from executives that have had experience with safety management systems, and some companies are just starting out on this issue. What didn't work for you? We've heard what worked. What didn't work? What challenges did you face that you said, oh, I wouldn't go down that road again? So I'll just open that up for anybody that.
If you've got a ready answer, go ahead.
I tell you what my learnings is not so much what worked, but what made it work for me, ultimately. When we first started, our PSMS was basically a KPI system, and that was okay, but I was not getting the product I needed. Mm-hmm. It was only until I put risk into it and started talking risk and got them at the risk table and doing the assessment of risk. When I say them, I'm talking about my direct reports and their managers. When that occurred and we were able to get them to the point of understanding risk and being able to feel comfortable to raise it, and we could talk about it honestly, and I could look in their eyes, which I did every quarter, that's when I started getting the assurance that we were actually moving the ball forward. Because a lot of times risks are so intertwined. It may be overtime over here, but it's driven by a big project load over there, but driven by a bunch of transfers over here, driven by OQ over here. And you've got to get all those on the table and understand how to fix it. So I would say that was the learnings for me. Really, the key learning is that just putting in measures gets you just measures. What you want is their understanding as experts of where do you stand today and where are you moving. And in my case, it was getting, like I said, the risk registry and those sort of getting them to understand that and help me understand that so we could work together to solve it as a team.
I think maybe it highlights the aspect of having a maturity element to the system, because as I think about it, I can't think of any big derailments, but just that there were things along the edges that didn't work, and so they need to be revised or reformed. And so you need to have a system that makes sure you're refreshing that so that you keep up with that. You know, one of the things that we've struggled with is on incident review. You know, how do you make the review of incidents or near misses across a whole bunch of disparate operations make sense for everybody? Mm-hmm. And so you spend a lot of time going through these things, and you get at the end of it, I think, a relatively few number of insights that you then need to go out and apply. Now, you know, you probably wouldn't get those few insights, and those few insights are essential. You probably wouldn't get them if you didn't go through the whole thing, and so maybe you declare that worth it. But there's we've struggled to make it more useful, I guess I'd say. But it's really, you need to have a system for improving so that the things that you stumble on in the implementation you address.
I think one of the big challenges is figuring out the difference between leading indicators and trailing indicators. You know, we all track trailing indicators, preventable motor vehicle accidents, days away, and all of that. Where we've struggled, frankly, is trying to figure out what measurable leading indicators look like. Number of safety observations is one route that we've gone. Number of safety observations by senior management, by employees, you know, all recorded. They're in the tens of thousands in the course of a year, and I think all that helps. But then you get your trailing stats, and you wonder if you ought to change course. And so I think that's a danger, is that sometimes you'll get your trailing stats, and it's like, oh no, the whole program needs to get revamped. And that's you can't overreact. There's been periods of time where I've been convinced that we'll never stop people from backing into stuff. Never. To the point where I've threatened to take the reverse gear pin out if you can, or do something, because they, you know, it happens all the time. And you could say, well, the program is suffering because people are backing into stuff. And that's where you have to really look at, of course, the causes of backing into stuff. Maybe you need a new gene pool. I don't know. But you absolutely have things like that. But I would say the thing we've probably struggled with is making the leading indicators meaningful so they don't just look like fluff. So we'll say there were 17,000 safety observations in the year 2014, just to pick a number, and you go, wow, that sounds good. What does it mean? you know? And so making leading indicators meaningful is one of the things I think that are, especially when it comes to personal worker safety, that I think I'd point to.
Definitely, because if that number goes up, is it a good thing or a bad thing?
Right.
What does it tell you?
Yeah.
You know, that's a hard one. So here's one that is, I take it more as a comment, but, so I'll read it. It says, journalists can bring light to pipeline safety advocacy. Maybe the government should fund some independent work by independent journalists. I don't really know that that's going to work, but it's a comment. It's a thought. So let me ask you another question, and I do know that Steve Kane is going to have to leave real quickly. So let me ask you one more question. Unintended consequences. We had two of you talk about vast amounts of money that you have invested into bringing on a solid safety management system. That means there were a lot of resources, a lot of people that were focused on those issues. So if you have a plate and you can only consume so much, what didn't get done? The question is there a danger of focusing so much on the new thing that some of the basics get dropped off? And how did you deal with that issue?
Well, you know, I think it really goes back to what Steve spoke about in terms of making sure that you're spending the money where it delivers the most value, right? And it's just not about spending money. It's about making sure that you're getting a most efficient use of that money, and you're putting it into the places that that you get the most risk reduction for the dollar invested. And that you really got to start with that all the basics need to be covered, and you can't let that go. I think that's sort of the biggest factor. And you know, in the regulatory scheme of things, right? That there's certain things that we need to do to meet regulatory compliance obligations that we're going to do, but they may not be the best place to put that money at that time, but they need to be done anyway.
I'd say a comment to that would be that the $4 to $5 billion that we've spent since 2010 on integrity management, I think, has mostly been spent on technology, dig programs, and whatnot that did not divert the people or the assets of the company away from other things. In other words, it wasn't a zero-sum game. I think what's maybe under the question is whether it is a zero-sum game and whether you necessarily must have let some things go. But that was something that we absolutely said we can't let happen. And so we didn't divert, let's say, critical operational people and resources away from what they were doing to support that initiative.
Yeah, and I would also mention, you know, I think that the Enbridge situation and the PG&E situation would hopefully not be the typical fast forward, get this all done very quickly. You know, I think companies hopefully would not be investing that kind of money for an average size company. I think that was just, you know, your particular circumstances. You know, the question that has been raised previously is that whole idea of what do I do? You know, if I can't do this and that, what do I give up? But I think you've answered that. You have to do a risk and evaluate where your biggest bang is coming. So I have one other question, and again, thank you. If you do need to step out, I know your timer's running out, but thank you for being here. I have one last question. Are there any industry benchmarks around KPIs or critical success factors being gathered that can be shared? Do you have any that you're aware of? Now, Steve, you mentioned a few, but are there any other ones?
You know, there, unfortunately, as somebody pointed out, the only thing that you can use for comparison purposes are the things that everybody tracks, which is, you know, what went wrong, because those things are reportable, and so then you can sort of make a reference to, well, I'm better than in the industry average or whatever, but it's like driving by looking in the rearview mirror at what got run over, and it's not particularly effective. So I think it's really, companies need to do their own KPIs and manage it themselves, because I think when you put them together, you're focusing on the things that are important to you. I mean, one thing that we use as a leading indicator is, you know, what is our compliance rate? So are we complying on time with a regulatory requirement or with a requirement in our O&M? So those things go into a system and they get tracked, and then we you know, report out the exceptions. Well, if you're doing those things and you're doing them on time, then that's a pretty good indicator that you're addressing at least what you intend to address and doing it in a timely fashion. And that should lead to, if the regulations are good and the permit requirements are good and your O&M requirements are good, that should lead to fewer incidents. So we do that, and I actually put some of that in our investor conference presentation, for example, to kind of show people how we're doing. But I think you got to tailor them, and that's what makes it difficult to come up with, I think, an industry standard that you could apply.
There is one industry benchmark that's there, and that benchmark is 0. No, I mean that quite seriously.
Agreed.
The path for each operator to get to 0 is different. As Steve talked about, the asset he's operating is quite different than mine, than Steve's, than Nick's. The pathway of what we have to address there is different. What you've got to, how you have to engage the workforce, what you've got to do is different. But the goal is still 0. And so you have to look at those aspects of your operation that is keeping you from 0 and go for them. Every operator's barriers to getting to 0 will be different. I'll also just address one other thing too. The organizational inertia to keep you from putting in a pipeline safety management system will be substantial, because you're going to change. You're changing the way you're managing your direct reports and their managers. You're going to change that. You have to understand that. That's also another challenge for you. It'll take some time, but you set that climate, as Nick had to do at PG&E, consistently do it, and either people will get on board or they'll go someplace else. But understand that is a price. But the goal is 0, and the rewards are substantial if you'll stay the course. Would you agree, Nick?
I do. Comment and a prediction. So at least for the gas distribution companies, the American Gas Association does have a annual benchmarking process. So there's a lot of financial data that's benchmarkable. There's a lot of customer service data that's benchmarkable. There's a lot of safety data that's benchmarkable as well. And the AGA last year put together a voluntary peer-to-peer program for different size companies to come together and compare notes, so to speak, and go travel and visit. So that's continuing into 2015, so that's another opportunity. So that's just a response on the distribution side. But my prediction is that we are going to get better as an industry to find a way to benchmark key data and statistics. And the reason why I say this is because when you look at the nuclear industry, they embarked on this journey of a safety management system, and the IMPO process grew out of that, and they share amongst all the 103 or 4 operating nuclear plants in the country, they share data every month, and they get to see benchmark data. We talked about responsible care in the chemical industry. Well, they started down the safety management system path about 23, 24 years ago. And they started almost identically to where we are now. Actually, we're a little ahead of where they just started. And they started with a voluntary exchange of information. And then it became a mandatory exchange of information. So I think we're going to evolve as people get to see the benefit of it.
I'd also just add, I think, Linda, in your opening remarks this morning, you talked about how the spill frequency in the liquids pipelines industry has been going down and volume, which is a good trend. The danger is not the question of so much where the industry trend is going, or if you will, the KPI of spill frequency and so on. It's what does it drive you to do as an individual operator? What does it drive you to just feel good or feel bad? So I think the danger of industry KPIs is that you risk being simply put into a situation where you feel good about it or you feel bad about it, and if you feel bad about it, you rationalize why your company is unique. And so that's, I think, something to keep in mind when you look at industry KPIs versus individual companies, because you never want to arrive at a place where you're satisfied, if you will. You know, we're fond, if you look at our annual report type literature, of saying that 99.99993% of all of our deliveries, which is billions of barrels, over the past 10 years have been delivered without any incident. And we are very proud of that record. But what about the other 0.00007, I guess it would be? That's still a lot of oil. And so that's the issue, I think, is that if you set a KPI that's less than 0, or in our case, less than 100% perfect, what does it really drive you to do? And it drives us to say, the number has to be 100. We'll never say that 99993 is acceptable. And that's the only danger, I would say, is that looking for industry KPIs can make you fall into the trap of just saying, I feel good about it because I'm better than the industry standard, or I feel bad, but here's why we're so unique.
I couldn't agree more. I think KPIs, metrics, can be very dangerous, especially if they're misinterpreted or they lead people down the wrong path. And, you know, your 0.0000, however many zeros, 7, you know, on a grand scale, it may not be much, but for the person's backyard it went into, it was a whole lot. So, you know, it's all about perspective, and I think also there is concern about we should never rest on laurels, because the commodity that is transported through these pipelines is far too dangerous to our communities, to people, to the environment. Even though there is a great containment rate, you're keeping it inside the pipe the vast majority of the time, it's too dangerous to ever say, well, letting a little bit out's okay, because it's just not, right? You know, would everyone please join me in giving a show of appreciation to our panelists here? Thank you very much. I think that we had some great insight here, and I hope throughout the whole day that everyone here, we still have some people here. Gentlemen, please hold the handrail. Safety first. You're a spotter. People on the webcast, thank you for staying with us all day. I think we've covered a lot of topics, a lot of information. We went from soup to nuts on 1173, and you know, I was trying to, Jeff does such a better job of this than I do, because he's able to pull it all together and say, this is what we talked about. And I said a minute ago, my head is spinning. That's because when I look at this list of what we talked about, we covered a lot of territory, and it's all interwoven. We talked about SMS should be doing the right thing, or doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do. We talked about whether it makes business sense. Is it a good decision for a company because it's the right thing to do? Financially, safety-wise, all those aspects. We talked about leadership commitment and the importance that if the leaders don't set the right tone, it's not going to succeed. But we also talked about the fact that you have to have safety leadership at all levels. So somehow you have to develop or improve upon a culture such that every single person in the organization takes ownership of that safety responsibility and says, it's my job to not only take care of my brother here, make sure he's safe, but also this asset that we're working on, make sure it runs safe. We talked about a constant state of unease. What could go wrong? We talked about humbleness. We talked about not saying, oh, we got a great safety record and we're done. We're never done. It's a continuous journey of improvement and of seeking to understand the risks and the threats. And part of that is about stakeholder engagement. What risks, what threats, what concerns do your stakeholders have that you may not be aware of? How can they help you improve what you do? And that's scary, because when Nick was talking about reaching out to unions and being open, did you hear what he said? He said he met for 4 hours, and the first 2 hours he got his butt kicked. That's not an easy situation, because you're going to hear about what you're doing wrong. And with stakeholder engagement, sometimes that happens. And you know what? Sometimes you need to hear it. And I also reflect that back to PHMSA. Sometimes we need to hear it too. It's not always easy to take. We heard about individual accountability. We heard that when things go wrong, maybe we shouldn't go on a witch hunt for the person that made the mistake. Maybe we shouldn't be looking for who's to blame, but maybe we should be looking for what process failed us. What happened such that this situation was allowed to occur? But at the same time, individual accountability, making sure that people take responsibility for doing the right thing. You know, I guess the last two items that I have here are communication. You know, we say that we subscribe to continual improvement, and I think we've developed a pretty strong standard, recommended practice. Sorry, Peter, wherever you are. Recommended practice that will help us move us forward on continual improvement. But I think we also have an obligation to communicate, not just internally, but also perhaps externally too. So that when the media reports, oh, they always only show up and say they're doing all these great things after an incident, maybe we should be letting everybody know what's being done to prevent the incidents. What we're doing, we're proactive, not reactive. With that, I would say thank you all. You've been very attentive, although very quiet. It's been a great workshop, at least for me, and I hope you all enjoyed it and got a lot out of it. For the people on the webcast, thank you for staying with us. And this webcast is being recorded, and it and all the presentations will be available within 2 to 3 weeks on the website. With that, I wish you safe travels home, and thank you again.